Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. So we are getting into the exciting part of the agenda where we get to hear from our members and some of the amazing work they're doing in terms of transformative solutions to close the gender gap and increase women's opportunities. So we have three really exciting presentations from Fiona Jarden at KIT talking about gender lens investing, Smita from BSR talking about wage digitization and how it can help build resilience for women. And then Wendy Chamberlin from the BOMA project talking about how financial services can build resilience in some of the most remote areas. So I'm not going to take too much time just to set this up. Each of them will speak for about 5 minutes, and we won't be taking questions right after each one speaks, but towards the end, we have some time reserved for questions. As you listen to these exciting presentations, please type your questions in the chat, and then when we get to the Q&A portion, I will channel them to our participants. So with that, I invite Fiona to take the floor.
Thanks so much, Nisha, and good afternoon from Amsterdam. My name's Fiona Jarden. I'm the Senior Financial Inclusion Advisor with the KIT Royal Tropical Institute. And for those who don't know us, we provide research and advisory services in the field of sustainable economic development and gender. And I'm really excited to be sharing some insights on what is a very confusing topic, often shrouded in a little bit of mystery, which is gender lens investing and its role to support women's financial inclusion. Next slide, thanks. So gender lens investing has been gathering a lot of great momentum in recent years, and KIT's increasingly working with development banks to integrate a gender perspective into their investment process. But what is it exactly? So there's a few definitions, but I'm going to present this one to you. It's the integration of a gender analysis into the investment cycle. That's the process. And investors like development banks do that to generate financial returns. And in more recent years, they're doing it to advance their goal of gender equality. And development banks play a really key role in this process to support women's financial inclusion. They have not just huge sums of capital. For example, the Dutch development bank, the FMO, invested 3.8 billion in financial institutions last year, but they deliberately invest to find opportunities to support women's financial inclusion too. So for example, here on this picture is Rihanna, an entrepreneur that I met last year in Panipat in northern India, and she's manufacturing these beautiful jute products. And the story behind this is that FMO invested in a financial institution called iFinance so that more entrepreneurs like Rihanna can have access to finance and grow their business. Next slide, please. So I appreciate that's still pretty jargon heavy and maybe even a bit unclear. So we're going to introduce to you this case study by the Development Bank of Austria, and the KIT's been working with, they're called OEEB, since 2019 to help them achieve their goal of integrating gender across their operations and investment cycle. I'm going to put a spotlight on their work investment activities for women's financial inclusion in particular, and given that they've made investing in financial institutions a timeline priority for advancing women's economic empowerment. So the way that you can look at this is that there's two phases to the approach. Phase one is very much about getting ready and building the internal capacity of the development bank on gender. And then phase two is about investing with a gender lens. And that's the sort of the doing part. So just to flag three key areas, there's the Gender Action Plan by OEB. This is available online. It's a sort of a compass, or it sets the direction for all the work on gender that OEB will be doing to really operationalise their gender commitment. They've also defined women's target market segments because, you know, recognising that women are not a homogenous group and their needs differ. So, you know, which women will they invest in? They've actually articulated that in their Gender Action Plan. and they've committed to doing gender training, which Kit conducted with them, so that all their staff can really understand key gender concepts, the barriers to women's financial inclusion, the business case, and so forth. Phase 2, which is about gender smart finance offerings. This is a credit line with a gender lens, which can be issued or invested in with financial institutions overseas so that they can lend to more women. In the case of OEB, it's female entrepreneurs. And technical assistance, which is a set of key services that can really build the gender capacity of financial institutions, whether it be around their products and services intended to serve women, or perhaps it's leadership within the bank, or female leadership, and so forth. Next slide, please. So I just want to finish with some thoughts and insights from this process that we've learned at KIT. And this is a slide that we often do with development banks that we're working with, this expectation versus reality. And as we know, gender barriers are really deeply embedded, and shifting the post on gender takes time. So we try to communicate that and make sure that everyone understands that gender finance is indeed a long-term solution. The second piece is that making gender capacity development or technical assistance is also a priority. So that means that not just giving gender lines or investing through credit lines, but also doing this really important technical assistance to local banks and MFIs so that they can design products and services that really meet the needs of women, like insurance and savings and non-financial services too. Install a continuous learning agenda is really key. It's really exciting that development banks in particular want to build this momentum on gender internally. They have gender task forces, they have brown bags and presentations and so forth to try and keep gender as a top priority. The last piece is that buy-in, of course, is really, really important. Whether it be frontline staff in local financial institutions through to a board member in a development bank, it has to be everyone's responsibility to promote gender and gender finance. The last slide, thanks. So if you're interested to hear more, would love to hear from you. Feel free to email me, and we are very willing to collaborate with anyone interested in supporting gender lens investing for women's financial inclusion. And here are some references which relate to my presentation today. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Fiona. We'll be sharing Fiona's slides, the resources, everything after the session is over. I see a couple of questions already about how to go about this and training, so we'll tackle that when we get to the Q&A portion. And now, before we move to the next speaker, we have a quick poll for you. Women's primary use of, Daniel, can you open the poll? Yeah, you're seeing a poll, and please respond what you think is the answer to women's primary use of DFS. Let's see, I'm gonna give it a few more minutes. Responses are coming in. They're all over the place. 5 more seconds and then we can close it, Daniel. Okay, so you're seeing that, about half of our audience believes that the primary use is for person-to-person transfers. 30% doesn't, and then a small fraction is unclear. So the answer, which actually, there's a mismatch between the slide and the poll, but the answer is actually, it depends. And that, like so many things in life, is so true in this case, because women, like any user, have a variety of needs, and digital financial services, usually the entry point seems to be for transfers, but as they get more comfortable with technology, they tend to use it for other purposes. So sort of that leads us to our next member share. We will hear from Smita from BSR about digital wages and how they can build women's financial resilience. So Smita, take it over.
Thank you, Nisha. Thanks, everyone. So hi all. So I'm Smita. I'm from BSR HERproject and I'm based in Bangladesh. So it's a pleasure to be here. So today, briefly, I'm going to share about our HERproject Digital Wages program that aims to expand financial inclusion of low-income workers in global supply chains. Next slide, please. So as we all know, probably, according to Findex, 230 million workers, majority women, are paid in cash globally. So this process is very risky, inefficient, and disempowering for employees and employers. If wages are paid in a digital account and financial capability training is ensured, then many women workers can have their first formal financial account and can be more financially resilient in the time of crisis like COVID. So in the photo here, you are looking at Diti, who is actually one of our peer educator worker participant from a factory in Gazipur, Bangladesh. So she shared with us that how her finance supported her and her husband during this difficult time. Let me share in her language what she said. Quote, my husband and I could not go to the village for months to see my son for lockdown. COVID has brought a very bad time for the people who are not well off. Many around me rush to borrow money, but due to my savings practices that I have learned from the training, I have been able to pass these days of no work without worrying too much. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So in collaboration with Gates Foundation, this program supported 7 garment factories and more than 100,000 garment workers in Bangladesh. A majority of them are women to digitize their payment and build their skills and confidence on financial management. So we saw an increase in financial inclusion, women empowerment, and also increase in business benefit as a result of the program. For example, like 1 in 5 workers started saving on a regular basis, and 1 in 5 women started participating in the family finance decision making. Factory management is now saving 59% of their admin time in payroll management. So the link of the full report will be shared in the chat box by my colleagues. So I think we can go to the next slide. So we have also conducted a survey actually recently with more than 700 workers from our finance program factories across 3 countries to gain insight how resilient workers have been and to understand their general well-being during the pandemic. The main finding is due to this program, women workers are more resilient during COVID. For example, workers use their payroll account very actively. Half of them reported confidence to manage expected costs, and communication between household members also improved, so as the joint decision making. So one female worker, like peer educator, she is Marufa, and she shared with us that during the COVID crisis, she helped several members of her family to open and use their mobile money account. The biggest benefit of having an account was that she got her salary when factory was closed in the lockdown. She could also top up her phone. She could also send money to her villages while staying at home. So the next slide, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so digitization is really the first step toward financial inclusion, and only digitizing wages alone without capability training, addressing gender norms and financial health, it is not possible to ensure financial resilience for women workers. So our finance tech tools, materials, toolkits those are really available on our website that can be really used for the training. And we also encourage partnerships and collaborations between financial service providers, government, development agencies, and factories to work together on the ecosystem development and to drive gender intentional innovations that can benefit the workers. For further details, I would like to encourage you to have a look at the recent report that we have published with Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth on digitizing for inclusion. The link of the report will also be shared in the chat box. So next slide is the last slide. Thank you. So basically, if you want to learn more about the program, kindly reach out to me and I'm happy to discuss further. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Isadora has shared all the links to the projects, resources, all the tools that BSR has developed. I think it's been really interesting to learn about how digitization is creating opportunities for joint decision-making, women's economic empowerment. This is truly a transformative solution that we are seeing, and presents a real opportunity as we move forward. So we will now move to our third presentation, but just before that, we have one more poll for you. So Danielle, if you want to go ahead and open the poll. So here's a question: how many of the unbanked adults, what percentage are women? So you should be, I see responses coming in. I think people on this call should know the answer to this one. We'll give it a few more seconds to get a few more responses, get a response rate up. 5 more seconds. Okay, I think we're going to close the poll. All right. So majority of the people, as I suspected on this call, know the answer to this question, which is 56% of the unbanked is women. And there are various reasons for this. We've been talking about all of them for the past 2 days, and that's part of the reason why FinEquity exists. And some of these unbanked women are based in very challenging environments, which is where the BOMA project works. So I'm going to invite Wendy to share a little bit about what they are doing to build resilience for unbanked women. Wendy?
Thanks, Nisha. Hi everybody, it's great to be here. My name is Wendy Chamberlin. I'm the Global Program Director for the BOMA project based in Nairobi, Kenya. Nisha, just as a heads up to you, I'm going to be pretty quick on these first 3 slides, so we won't be spending too much time on them. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Program. Next slide, please. There you go. That operates in northern Kenya and in Karamoja, Uganda. We are very typical of other poverty graduation programs in terms of the type of approach that we undertake, offering a time-bound sequence set of interventions to deliver livelihood training. We've been in operation for about 15 years and to date have enrolled about 34,000 women in our program. Next slide, please. So assuming collective familiarity with the poverty graduation approach on this call, there are some key components to the poverty graduation model which really do help to promote financial capability and financial well-being. What makes this model unique is that it relies on multi-sectoral indicators of measurement. And that's a consistent refrain throughout the world of poverty graduation programs. Our model we do a 3-person business group because we find in working in a low infrastructure, widely distributed environment like northern Kenya, we see greater sustainability of the businesses that are launched. These models also include participation in a savings group, regular mentorship, community household engagement, and then intentional focus on market linkages. Next slide, please. So I think this conversation is really interesting and it's near and dear to my heart from my own background. And it's been a question I've thought about a lot. How can digital financial services, and especially thinking about the success story of Kenya, how can this be relevant in an environment like northern Kenya? What you're seeing here is very typical of a Manyata, which is another name for a village or small community in the north. I mentioned before, these are areas that are characterized as being low infrastructure, widely distributed communities. And for those of you familiar with Northern Kenya, you will know that the Kenya success story of M-Pesa has not reached here in the same way. And there's some lessons to learn about that I want to share with you, and then I'll explain how we're seeing digital financial services play a role. You know, when we think about Northern Kenya and when people see pictures like this in the North, there's a lot of perceptions that are made on the supply side. And those perceptions are around, well, just look at this place. What can be done here? There's no infrastructure, so there's no way to reach her with limited infrastructure. We often hear the refrain from providers too. There's markets there. Like, how can there be markets in this place? Because there's just doesn't look like there's a lot happening. And therefore, we also hear a lot of surprise in the fact that you can have businesses that are incubated and grow and linked to formal markets as well. And so some of our lessons actually as a provider have been, there are a lot of misperceptions about the viability of digital financial services in environments like this. If you go to the next slide, please. When we think about digital financial services and how it works for her, we see it work for her in ways that we would see in many other markets. You know, the women we work with, they use their phones to pay school fees. They do use their phones for person-to-person transactions, just like the first poll. They're using their phones to get better pricing for their goods in the stores that they operate. They will, if they can access an agent and they can receive all the funds, then that's also something she relies on in order to receive government cash transfers. Increasingly, we see people saying, yeah, this is a reliable way for me to store my money. And they know that they can be eligible for relevant financial products. But then at the same time, we see some pretty persistent barriers that will be not at all unfamiliar to on hand so that she can receive her government benefit in full. We just conducted a study with Busara around COVID response. And from that, we learned that while people were trying to access agents nearby, and this is in multiple communities, most of the time they can only take half of their benefit. And that doesn't include the informal discount of what it takes to travel to that agent. Her ability to read or understand a USSD menu is a significant barrier that we face, especially when that's delivered in the dominant language and doesn't take into account that she may not have had the formal training to learn how to interact with the dominant language. And then financial solutions, they may be relevant, but maybe it's how they are delivered. They're overly complex or may seem irrelevant for her. An example of this is we have a livestock insurance product that we're testing with UC Davis and ILRI. We've repackaged that as a household insurance product, and that makes a ton of sense for her, whereas livestock insurance, she was less likely to take that product up. And then the last one goes back to the previous picture I shared. We've learned a lot that financial service providers actually doesn't know that she has a thriving business and that she could be a viable customer. And she's not a one-off, she's a scaled viable customer too, but there's a bit of a disconnect on the data story here. And so we'll go to one more slide that I'll share with you just to kind of drive some of these points home. If you can go to the next slide, please. So these are three women who are entrepreneurs in the program we work with. Their primary business, being pastoralist women, are livestock traders. And then they also operate a convenience store. With COVID restrictions, their livestock business got shut down. And so they accessed the savings that they had through their savings group, which is a key component of our program, to be able to purchase a sewing machine. They leveraged the market know-how of the mentor to say, is there a market opportunity around sewing masks or something like this? And lo and behold, there was. They've been able to then create an additional income generating stream that surpassed what they were doing in livestock for the moment in order to support their family needs. And so I use this point, it's so simple. She's using financial services. She wants access to financial services. And if it can work for her, digital, all the better. But so far, we still have this disconnect, this perennial disconnect of how to meet her where she is at. So that's all I have for my presentation to share about, which is really focused on one area. But I would say that what we see in Northern Kenya is really consistent with what we see in other arid land areas that are widely distributed communities, but who have a meaningful need for these solutions.
Great, thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Fiona and Smita as well. So we have now, we're going to move to some question and answers. I see that there's a very lively chat going on, and some of our presenters have already been responding. But I think just in the interest of making sure everybody gets to hear about them, I will pose some of those questions, and maybe Fiona and Smita, you can elaborate on those points. And then Wendy, we have a few questions for you as well. So I'll start with Fiona. And there was a question about the training materials that you've used. Are they publicly available? And then how do you integrate gender analysis into investment cycles? So Fiona, maybe if you want to start first.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I have to check if it's publicly available, but we definitely do have training materials and toolkits for gender capacity development with institutions. I actually assume they are publicly available through our gender team, but I'll definitely double check. And yeah, we do a lot of gender training, for example, in collaboration with UN Women, and that's that gender training there's more information about that online. So was there more parts to that question, Nisha?
And the second part was around gender analysis.
Oh yeah, from Deanna. Yeah. Perfect. So, okay, so practical examples of ways to integrate a gender analysis into the financial analysis so that you can make better investment decisions. One example is that development banks and investors do their due diligence processes, and you can, it's really important to include a gender lens to that process so that you're asking the questions like, do you see the business case for investing in women? What are you doing to invest in women? What does your female portfolio look like? So you're sort of testing the intention and the capabilities, and some of the more sort of structured readiness for the local financial institution to take an investment that can support them to better serve women too. So the gender due diligence is one example. You can also do a needs assessment, which is basically a questionnaire that you send out in advance. And I also shared a link to the Austrian Development Bank's Gender Action Plan, which highlights some of the actual activities and steps that you can take to integrate analysis throughout the investment process. I believe we might even have someone on the line from the Austrian Development Bank who might be able to share more in the chat.
Great, thanks. And I will come back to you, maybe Fiona, but I'm going to move to Smita really quickly. Smita, there was a question about costs and, factory owners funding these efforts, or is you said this initial work was supported through partnership with Gates Foundation. What's your model going forward?
Thanks, Nisha. So actually in HERproject, most of our programs are actually proven ones mostly are funded by brands and factories. So HERproject has Her Health, Finance, and Respect. All these initiatives are brand and factory led, like in collaboration with factories, of course. So that program is still on. It is always on because we have designed that in that way. So we just wanted to test a pilot with Gates, and if that works, so that program is on. So that's one way. And second thing that we are working on right now is we are building some partnerships with different stakeholders who can actually support factories in a gender responsive training. That partnership will include different local organizations, including FSPs, etc. So we sort of want to build an ecosystem so that factories have enough options available. They can come to us because we have a very good and proven program running. Because this works and data is quite excellent, but they will also have other options if they want to find out. So we want to make sure that we just want to make sure that because they might not only want to come to us, they might also want to come to other stakeholders. So it's like just wanted to ensure that they have enough options in place. So that's something we are working on actually this year.
Great. And Wendy, we have a slew of questions for you. And they range from, about the insurance product and developing, repackaging that, and then around, agents. Are women interested in being agents? Have you looked at, sorry, I'm trying to keep track of all the questions between all the chats. So yeah, maybe we'll start with the insurance product and also working with agents and building financial capability, how you do that a little bit.
Okay, I'll try to be brief on these. So I put a link in the chat, by the way, which links to an AgriLinks article that we wrote with Michael Carter. Basically, the premise behind this this index-based livestock insurance. So we are at the midline and soon to share out the midline results of this RCT, and it looks at the efficacy of IBLI for pastoralist households, especially pastoralist women. And it's not the first time this work has been done. I always mention IBLI with a little temerity because I've done other work on it and it doesn't always work out that great. But we were seeing some really promising signs. One of the comments talked about this too. And what it was, first it was like, here you go, here's your index-based livestock insurance, blank faces, why the heck do I want this? To here's household insurance, and this can help your household become resilient. It's one more tool in your toolkit. That made a lot more sense and seemed less abstract to the households that we're working with. And so, we're going to find out pretty soon here what has been the uptake. We've had several reoccurring drought and flood and related livestock diseases cycles take place, never mind locusts and COVID. And so there's some very material
Oops, looks like we lost Wendy for a second.
This is available. For those interested, it's happening in Samburu County as a heads up. On the question around agents, I think the question is around, could women be agents? Absolutely. And I think we're finding that this conversation isn't as simple as, well, so let's make her be an agent. It's actually a conversation that has to happen first with, let's talk to the financial service providers about what service delivery options can be provided in the areas in which we work in a way that makes these agents profitable, because there are agents there, but they're agents often by name on a sign, and like there's not actually a human occupying the space, or they don't have cash, which renders the service not so helpful. And so we're actually taking a few steps back to say, let's portray and create a very strong demand side picture for what kind of services could be made available to here, and then how do we close that gap with either agents that the bank provides or women in our program becoming agents. But there's so many other pieces around making that digital highway work, with agent profitability, agent liquidity, all being key factors as part of that.
Great.
Was that it?
Oops, Wendy, we lost you for a second again.
Oh, sorry. Was that the final question?
No, we do have one more question, which I think, is probably was on my mind and a lot of people, about costs, broadband costs, data costs, access issues. So how do you factor that in, given, that very stark picture you showed of where the people you work with are based?
Yeah, and I'm giving you a real-time issue right now here just in Nairobi of access costs, because my broadband's going in and out as we talk, so I apologize for that. 5 years ago, I think we would have had a very different story of data reach and network reach in the north, but that story is changing with greater infrastructural development in northern Kenya. And so many of the communities we work with are becoming more connected and have access to 3G network, maybe 4 if they're closer to So I think there's a few things and ways that I can answer this question. I mean, in our program, we give every woman who's enrolled in our program a basic phone to use because we think digital financial services are key. And yet we know that we can't solve for the whole piece of it. With infrastructural development, as I mentioned, we are seeing an increase in reach in network connectivity. So FAR-ECOM data and their data pricing and coverage has been adjusted a bit with COVID, in some cases more on the agent fees and so on. I would say people also are quite savvy in figuring out how to mitigate those costs and pricing around that. So when we talk to people, their biggest barrier on using, is not around data so much as network and phone, and also just reading the menu and a very basic standpoint, and not having to hand over their phone for somebody else to manage and translate for them what is happening with their financial lives.
Great, thanks, Wendy. I'll come back to you maybe, but Fiona, I have a question for you, which is, have you developed any training programs for frontline staff? I'm assuming that wasn't probably applicable in the case of the Austrian bank, but I know at KIT you've been doing work with other commercial banks.
Yeah, I'm not in a position to say too much about the Austrian development bank's work there, though, it could be something that happens in the future, I'm sure. However, with the KIT Royal Tropical Institute, we have actually just finished doing a whole suite of gender trainings with frontline staff for a Pan-African bank in Sub-Saharan Africa. And that training was not just for frontline staff, but also senior management. We tried to include all layers of the institution. My colleague Maureen Quilato is actually on the line and led that training. And the objective is to introduce key gender concepts and the main barriers that exist that hold women back from accessing and using financial services in an equitable way as men do. But it also brings in some of the insights that we might have got through the bank from doing things like an analysis on their strategy or market research with female market segments. So we sort of bring those insights in it as well. The training is super, super important because we can talk about, we can deliver all these services to a financial institution, but I actually think that the training provides the safe space and the opportunity for staff to stop and think and discuss it, to really get there, to really have that conversation with each other around why these challenges exist and what the opportunities are to progress outreach to the female market segments.
Great, thanks. And I'll use this as an opportunity to plug my session later on gender transformative solutions, because this is one of the sub-themes that we're discussing around how do you change behavior at the provider level and all the people involved, because the norms that shape individuals' behaviors then get transferred into institutional structures, which are made of human beings. So, we need to be thinking at all levels of the system and changing behavior at all of those levels to make the financial ecosystem more equitable. So come join us and learn more. And there was an interesting question that Deanna brought up about, Smita, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot and see if you have any thoughts on how the barriers or solutions that Wendy shared, in Kenya, in this very remote area, if any of that resonates with the populations BSR has worked with on the HERproject, and how you might have addressed those.
Most of our factories are in, I won't say it's a very remote area. So it's rather like outskirt of the cities. So it's around the cities. So, but we do face issues, and we face it even now with access to the ATMs, especially like booths, etc., like access to the agents or ATMs. So I would say agents are more available, but ATMs are still not available that much. So that is like one of the structural issues that, I mean, it will take a long time to fix. And then government also has, has been working with FSPs in different other solutions. For example, agent banking is another solution that they're working with the government, working with the FSPs. So it's more for the very rural areas in Bangladesh where access to any technology is very difficult. So our respondents, like they actually send money to their villages through phone, and that can be like an agent sitting in the village or to their own own relatives, like father, parents, anyone, or mother has a phone, or yeah, basically has a phone. So that part is actually taken care of. But in terms of like having FSPs availability in the factory areas, that is not a huge problem. But in the beginning, when we started this program back in 2016, I think that was a huge challenge. But now, like, ecosystem is gradually developing, at least around the factory areas. So
great, thanks. I realize we're right at time. So this was a really interesting discussion. Fiona, Wendy, Smita, thank you so much for your presentations. There are, I think, a couple more questions in the chat if you want to respond to them directly. But this was very insightful, and I think also demonstrates some of the value of FinEquity, where we can learn from different contexts because some of the problems are the same, and there are solutions we've devised in one area that might have some level of applicability in another area. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Diana.